Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Fin TV. Today, we've got a great guest, Kelsey Hudspeth, who is the industry consultant specializing in supply chain and sustainability over at IBM. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you being on here.
Thank you so much, Maria. I'm really excited to be here.
Great. Well, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey so far?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I am an industry consultant that specializes in supply chain and sustainability here in Munich, Germany. Although I myself am not German. I come from the US, but I've been living in Munich for about 3.5 years now. I work at the IBM Watson Center Munich Center here in Germany. We are one of a couple of different client centers around the globe where IBM looks to showcase the art of the possible when it comes to technology and digital transformation. So essentially my job every single day is to inspire executives and client groups that come to the center to learn about areas of technology. What I really try to do, especially on my team when it comes to supply chain and sustainability, is to really bring to life these concepts around these emerging technologies and these buzzwords we like to see or that we hear in the boardroom. So it's things like blockchain, things like IoT, things like AI, and how do we actually make those not only realistic and understood by people who are perhaps not from a technical background, but also how could we potentially help our clients integrate those technologies into their business processes, and where do they start? I think that's a lot of questions that people come through with. So since joining IBM, I've dealt with over, I believe it's now about 300 different client groups that range from anywhere from large Fortune 500 companies to smaller, maybe small, medium-sized organizations from all over the world, from Asia to South America to Europe to North America. And you begin to see a lot of parallels and patterns between some of the difficulties and the challenges people are facing when it comes to digital transformation, regardless of industry or company size. So that's sort of my working area, but who I am, I guess, as a person, I really am passionate about sustainability and how technology can be a part of that, and specifically how supply chain can really be a source of not just mitigating some of the challenges that we're going to be facing, whether it comes to things like climate change or more disruptive climate behaviors, but also how it can be part of the solution. So what I like to do in my free time as well as in the office is help guide companies to understand how it is that we need to bring the topics around sustainability outside of corporate social responsibility as a department and weave it into the rest of the organization. So that's a little bit about
That's
me.
Brilliant. Wait, so there's quite a lot I want to talk to you about. So I mean, let's start with digital transformation, because you say you help companies with that and understand the practicalities or realistic practicalities around digital transformation. We know that a lot of projects fail. A lot of digital transformation projects fail. Number one. Yes. Number two, even the ones that succeed, I'm hearing from a lot of our members that, well, you know what, it's not lived up to what I expected it to do. It's almost as though they believe that digital transformation was going to be this magic bullet that was going to solve all of the problems of the business. So I guess I'm asking you to generalize you don't have to give specifics unless you want to, but why do you think digital transformation projects fail?
Oh man, so there's a couple of different areas that I've seen this occur oftentimes. The first one, which is the one that I love to bring up most often, is that every digital transformation project really needs an executive sponsor. So we get a lot of really excited, maybe upper middle level management that come into our center and are so excited about the potential opportunities that IoT could provide them or blockchain could do. But then when it finally comes to the person who's going to sign on that dotted line or is going to really be the advocate in the boardroom, then it falls flat.
Yeah.
And so when clients come, especially in those types of groups, or even when the executive groups come to us to have these types of conversations, one of the things that I like to try to bring up really in kind of the first conversation is who is the executive sponsor and who has skin in the game. especially when it comes to this project, and who's going to make sure that this that they have the resources and the time and the not just monetary resources, but the people available to make sure that the project is going to be successful. So I think that that's probably one of the most important areas of digital transformation. And another one is, I think, also attitude towards digital transformation. So people think that, okay, I'm going to do my digital transformation. It's going to be this project. It's going to start, it's going to finish, and then I'm going to be digitally transformed. But digital transformation is a journey, right? Digital transformation is not a linear.
It's an ongoing journey
well.
too. It's an ongoing thing. Yeah.
It's an iterative process that continuously comes back and comes up. And I think, I think that sometimes people get this idea that it's just going to completely revolutionize their organization, or that they'll be able to see it is how it revolutionizes in 6 months to a year. And I think you can absolutely get some quick wins, and you need to build quick wins into whatever pilot project you have going or whatever scaling project to make sure that there's still that continuous buy-in from the other levels. But I think that this idea that we're just going to start and then finish and then you're going to be there is kind of setting yourself up already for failure.
Do you think that's lack of understanding of what digital transformation is, really, or it can do?
I think in some ways it could be. I think also companies and organizations in general, especially ones who do digital transformation, be it IBM, be it Microsoft, be it Amazon, be it, any of these big names, we are all very good at latching on to buzzwords. And so the things like the blockchain and things like the IoT, and then the marketing team runs with that. And they're like, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to IoTize everything, and it's just going to be this whoop, bam, amazing thing. But the reality is that that these are still emerging technologies, right? That means that they are still becoming more and more mature. And so because they are still maturing, there's still going to be areas that still need to be figured out. And so I think sometimes people just maybe have a bit of a misconception as to the capabilities of the technology today and where it could be tomorrow, given enough investment of time and money. But also people don't quite necessarily understand that a lot of these projects need to start small, and you need to really get your minimum viable product. You need to prove it, and those things take time, and then you need to grow and build on top of it. So a perfect analogy that I love to use is that you have to build your cupcake so that you can get a taste of the cupcake, of how the frosting is, of how the cake is,
the texture is,
the texture, before you get the wedding cake.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to just necessarily build the wedding cake right off the bat because something could go wrong. But why don't we test something a little bit smaller, then elevate to a birthday cake, and then to the final wedding cake, which will be this snazzy thing that you can actually serve to guests. So the kind of process behind it and the amount of time that it takes is, I think, sometimes for people who are very numbers driven in the short term and perhaps don't necessarily have the technical understanding of how these types of things work, is a little bit harder to grasp.
You've mentioned two things here, why digital transformation projects fail. You haven't said it fails because of technology. You've talked about people here. This is all a people thing. So it's having someone with the skin in the game, having someone who's got having a business with the right attitude, I guess the right mindset. And this goes probably back, I don't know, maybe 20 years even, because, before you'd buy an ERP system and it would come out of the box and you'd put it in, and that was a process and that was it. And it either worked or didn't work and what have you. This is a different sort of game,
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
100%. And, it's actually funny that you mentioned the people, because I've actually heard in a couple of your other podcasts, you talk really about, I think you really like honing in on that. It's about the people. And it's absolutely true. I think one of my favorite things that I love to say is the technology is easy. It's people that are hard.
Yeah.
And so the change management that needs to occur in order to get people on board with any sort of challenge or any sort of project is quite difficult. And but the thing is, people can also be your greatest asset. So when you have people, especially who are maybe young and hungry and want to learn and have that their mind is still malleable to be able to take on new things. I mean, I think that is in and of itself as well can also be an asset. Absolutely. So it's kind of that, that double-edged sword. But I think so much of our projects are far less about the technology that we're implementing, and it's far more about the people who are going to be using the technology. So we love to talk about AI and how it's going to revolutionize everything, but our machine learning models are only as smart as the people who are inputting the data and information into them. And so inherently, AI is going to be biased. That's why we need to have certain checks and balances to ensure that we self-correct, or we are able to correct for those types of biases. And if you build a platform, it's going to fall dead in the water if you're not building the user interface that somebody who maybe is not technically savvy would want to use it, right? Doesn't matter how amazing of the things it doesn't matter all the information it pulls from your SAP system. If at the end of the day, your logistics guy doesn't use it, then that was millions of dollars invested for nothing, right? And
well,
so
or more,
really important
more importantly, if you don't know what problem you're trying to solve, if you're digitizing for the sake of digitization,
absolutely.
Do you see that? Do you get that?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Trying to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
This happens quite a lot, and it often happens quite a lot when somebody comes in and says, "I want blockchain," and everyone's like, "Okay, well, what do you mean by blockchain?" If you go to technology and goes, "I want blockchain," well, they go, "Well, what do you want to use it for?" They go, "I don't know. I was just told I need to have blockchain. So can you please come give it to me?" And that, unfortunately, sometimes that works. Sometimes they're like, "Okay, maybe we're onto something. We could find a pretty good use case." But that sort of retroactive thing of being like, is blockchain really the smartest technology for this problem? Or what really is the issue? And that having a really human-centric design, which is something that our design thinking methodology at IBM really tries to focus on, and any design thinking methodology, I think, is really tries to hone in on, is who is the user and how are we trying to make their life easier? What are we doing to make their life easier? And what kind of business results and business benefit will we get because of this bettering of the process? So yeah, I hope that answers your question. But yeah, this is a huge thing.
Completely. And it is sort of my bugbear as well, and podcast after podcast that I have, I talk to people about digital transformation, the definition of, digitalization. What does this mean for this person, that person? And when it comes down to it, we all realize that if you just digitize for the sake of digitization, you're really not going to solve the problem of, what am I trying to achieve? What problem do I have? How am I going to make things easier? And it's destined to failure. The majority of these projects do fail because of some sort of people element. If you can give examples, can you maybe talk to, say, companies where you've seen it go well and what they've done?
Absolutely. So I think, so there are a couple different things. And actually one is going to be an actually interesting anecdotal piece, because we've been working a lot recently with our actual IBM internal supply chain. Mm-hmm. So as many people probably remember, IBM was a very hardware heavy company for a really, really long time. My joke was that IBM was always the company my friends' parents worked for. It was never going to be the company that necessarily I worked for as a, young 30-something millennial, essentially. Yeah. And now, of course, we have ourselves done very much a lot of transformation. We have gone from being a very hardware heavy to a very software and services heavy organization. However, our supply chain is still around. We're still sending mainframes all over the globe, and it's still a very, very strong example of digital transformation in supply chain. And so it's been quite interesting talking to the digital transformation team within IBM to figure out what were some of their challenges and what was it that they needed to solve and how was it that they were going to solve it. And so we have slowly been incorporating different areas of things like of technologies like AI, of IoT, of using things like chatbots, which is kind of in the realm of AI, to help our supply chain employees do their job better. And so we actually created our own internal tool using a couple of the other different types of IBM technologies we have around that we offer to clients, called our Cognitive Supply Chain Advisor 360. And it's essentially sort of like a chatbot where you can actually go in and you can ask it questions about different shipments. So it also then can create resolution rooms as well, which is another thing. We have other solutions that actually offer this type of thing as well, called Sterling, but it offers resolution rooms that we can, if we need to discuss something with maybe a supplier or maybe another person in a different department, then we can bring those people into a single sort of chat room, if you call it, with the AI or Watson, like we like to call it, being a supporting role. So if we are looking that one of our mainframes is delayed or something like that, we're trying to figure out where it's needing to go to or why it is being delayed, then we can actually ask the system why this is happening or where they are at the location. We've also fitted a lot of our containers and our mainframes with IoT sensors for temperature data, for, of course, humidity sensors in case something were to go wrong. So there have been incidences where perhaps it got onto the wrong truck in somewhere, I think it was in India, and the temperature started to go above a certain threshold. And so we actually called the logistics company who was transporting that to figure out what was happening. It turned out it was taken into the wrong truck, and it wasn't a climatized logistics transport.
And you were able to respond to that, and you were able to respond to that quickly.
Exactly. And even more importantly, we were actually starting to respond to the COVID-19 crisis in early January, because we were getting alerts from different news sources as well, that was indicating that something was going on and that we needed to take a look at the resiliency of our supply chain and of where we were getting especially a lot of our materials from either the Wuhan area or in Asia in general. So this allowed us, and this is also something that we've been trying to build out then for clients as well. It's called Risk Insights, and basically it takes structured and unstructured data in the world. So whether that's news sources or social media channels or different types of data sources like that, and is able to predict potential disruptions and where they're happening, so that then we or our supply chain manager, whomever it is, what part it is that they are taking care of, can respond quicker than waiting for it to become a full-fledged issue. So it's that kind of response time that has been really good.
Well, it's funny because I keep hearing about, AI couldn't have predicted COVID. And although all these great technologies are fantastic, you can't predict the unpredictable. But someone said to me yesterday that in one of the podcasts I was just recording, that it's not about predicting the unpredictable, it's about responding quicker and being able to respond quicker and adjust and pivot and be agile enough, etc. So the fact that you guys were responding around January already, you started to build your resilient supply chain to respond to this is quite telling. Let's talk about the pandemic now, because clearly we're in the middle of something that is just unprecedented. How do you think how has that changed our perception of digital transformation, as well as the speed of change for digital transformation?
I think it has accelerated the speed of digital transformation. I think, it's tough, right? So as a company, you now realize, I think more people realize now more than ever, that they absolutely have to digitally transform. There's no option. However, we're still in survival mode. And so a lot of people are wanting to keep that cash close at hand and not invest in digital transformation projects, because as you said before, a lot of them fail. So if you're strapped for cash and you are worried that it's going to fail,
you don't want to take on this big project that could potentially fail.
Exactly. So,
but there's a big but there. There's a big but. If you don't do it,
then you're going to be left behind. And that's unfortunately the reality. And I think that especially with digital transformation and the speed, I think organizations are now beginning to see that they absolutely have to transform, even ones that traditionally maybe were very anti-digital transformation for a while. I mean, a perfect example is living here in Germany. I mean, Germany is quite notorious for being a little bit more analog than a lot of other places. And I've never seen more clients interested in digital transformation in the German region than I have now. And really trying to be like, okay, how are we going to do this? And I think also a big push as well is the consumers too. So I think also it's kind of coming from both ends, right? So you have the CEOs who are being like, we need to be able to survive. How are we going to do that? But also consumers like us, as individual people, we are far more cognizant of where our items are coming from. Yeah. And what type of impact they have on the planet. So I know sustainability kind of has like a little bit of a frou-frou kind of feeling to a lot of people, but I think you're starting to see so many more organizations. I think Apple just today released the fact that they were going to become climate neutral by 2030 and help all of their suppliers become climate neutral or something along those lines.
It's not frou-frou. It's the thing is, I think, and you know, I've been in supply chain a long time, and there's been a conversation around corporate social responsibility and sustainability for a while. It's just not been actioned. You know, it's just nothing's really been done. Now, right now, I think people are starting to realize, because generally everyone's talking about it a lot more, but equally a lot more of the younger generations are getting consumer power. And you know, more dollars contributing to consumer, you know, to buying, right? And so as a result, people want to know where their stuff is coming from and what the impact is.
And so with that, so if that's a push both from the consumer level and actually from also the regulatory level, then you have these types of technologies that can support you in that. So like one of my favorite example is this project that IBM Food Trust has done with Carrefour, the major supermarket retailer in France, to help them differentiate their private label brands in the shop. So they have allowed customers to go in and, using a QR code, track and trace the origin of that food directly to the farmer. And so there are a couple of foods. It's still they're still working on adding more and more foods to the bank. But what's very cool is, and what they've seen is a total uptick in the amount of private label foods from Carrefour that people have been purchasing, because they see that as transparent and trustful. And I think that, you know, and what was interesting is that even when they took it off of the packaging, they still saw that uptick and maintained purchasing of Carrefour private label brands. And so, as a test to see whether or not this was actually just a fluke or if this was something that was actually of interest. And I think, especially in Europe, I think that is a huge focus area, is people have a huge interest, especially when it comes to track and trace and things like blockchain, which is very much underpins track and trace. Consumers in Europe have a very big interest in product provenance and understanding where their things are coming from. Are they coming from sustainable locations? Are social and human rights issues in question? Yeah. Are we ensuring that we are not digging up half the earth for the rare earth minerals that are coming into our, you know, batteries? Those types of questions, I think I think it's becoming as well in the US, but I think Europe, there's a really big push from consumers I've seen that have this interest, and things like blockchain especially can support people doing that, not just having the access to the information in real time in a way that you know is going to be trustworthy, that is not going to be tampered with, but also as a way to actually reach out closer to your end customer, which is, I think, what a lot of organizations are also trying to figure out, how can we do?
Yeah. But, you know, I think it's the winds of change, right? You know, so before this was something that people talked about. Now people are actually actioning this. A lot of the conversations I've been having recently since the pandemic have been about the opportunities that the pandemic have created to redesign the supply chain, to look at the current business models of the previous business models and evolve. Do you think we have an opportunity now to look at more, say, well, apart from obviously building a resilient supply chain, but building a supply chain that's perhaps more circular, building based on a circular economy, looking at more sustainable business models? You know, do you think that right now we have that opportunity?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the thing that I've been talking to clients a lot about recently is, never has COVID brought or never has an incident in the world brought so many challenges, and never have we had so many opportunities. Yeah. Because when things break, you have the opportunity to rebuild. I mean, that's like basically, you know, if your house burns down, you get to rebuild it the way that you potentially want it. And so if you can survive through, then this is, I think, the critical turning point for clients to figure out what areas do I need to really rethink, and how can I start to bring in those concepts of like circular economy into my system to truly make a sustainable supply chain. And that word sustainable has been, I think, quite greenwashed over the last couple of years. But if we take a look at the tradition, like what exactly sustainable means, it means the ability to continue going on as you are, right? Yeah. And so, and I think
it's not some sort of radical departure, you know?
No, I just want to literally sustain my ability to continue growth. I mean, that to me is quite simple. And the way to do that, the reality is we have finite resources here. And so we need to figure out, how do we not only use those finite resources on the planet effectively and efficiently, but how do we also make sure that we are disposing of those things, that we are getting all of the energy and the value out of those things. So even if we're manufacturing something, what is the byproduct? What is the waste? And how could that be then put into a different loop? You know, how are we ensuring that the products that we are making are good, that the supplies that are being used or the raw materials are coming from a sustainable source that then we can put back in to the system and have more inputs the next time around? Because right now we're kind of just going and then all of a sudden it's just dropping off. Whereas this, we need to continue to create those inputs if we are going to have any chance of remaining sustainable, as in remaining actually functioning as an entire system. So I think that circular economy especially is extremely important, and circular supply chain really sits at the heart, because it's not going to be possible without it. We're going to have to figure out those like reverse logistics systems. We're going to have to figure out, how do we actually dispose of waste? How do we get back those byproducts and get them into potentially other loops that might be able to use them? And the supply chain of an organization, supply chain experts, are going to be absolutely critical in that transformation. We will not be able to do it without them.
And this is again where people's attitudes, going back to your earlier points, people's attitudes are going to be extremely important here. And also, who has skin in the game? Who wants to drive this? Who wants to, you know, what problem are we trying to solve? Going back to product provenance, you know, the consumer demand is there. You know, the consumers are dictating to some degree this kind of change, and businesses either rise up to it and stay relevant, or they risk any kind of loss of competitive advantage, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, I think for a really long time, organizations were waiting for the regulations, for the politics to basically catch up. But I think what they are starting to realize is that there is massive innovation opportunity and ability to capture a market share that maybe they traditionally wouldn't have been able to capture if they're able to speak to the potentially younger generation who are now gaining more and more purchasing power. And I think that, you know, a lot of organizations are really having to rethink how their systems are being done, and a lot of things are being disruptive. But I think that if they are able to hone in on some of the interests as it relates to product provenance or more sustainable source, I mean, it's not only good for the marketing budget, you know, it's not only good for like the view of the society of the company, but it also can lead to massive innovation, because if you have to create a material that is going to be biodegradable, you could potentially create something that is a entirely new idea that a competitor wouldn't even be able to touch. And that, I think, is where the innovation lies. And so people should be taking that on, not being drugged along the way by whatever regulations there are from the government perspective or things like that.
And let's go back to technology for just a second. You know, you know, part of your remit is to look at the exciting new technology that's out there. But what kind of technology are you most excited about right now?
I am really excited. You know, I am really excited about blockchain, and I think blockchain kind of has like one of those things that hasn't really lived up to the hype. And the reality is we're finding better and better use cases for it. The area that
is it probably because most people don't understand it?
I think so. I think that's exactly what it is. They're like, oh, blockchain, this is going to be amazing. This is going to be great. Like, we have to have it. And there's some areas that it's really good. One of which to me, which is really where kind of my personal passion lies, is in the food industry. And so, really being able to help companies be able to track and trace, and consumers track and trace where their food is coming from, ensuring that it's coming from a sustainable and ethical location. I think blockchain as a technology that allows you to ensure that what you are getting is actually what you are getting, and to be able to instantaneously trace back where something is coming from. I think, especially in the food system, this has massive implications. And I think it will help people be much, much more aware of where their food is coming from. And I think it also allows us to see along the value chain and see how many players are involved. I think so many people think that all of a sudden you buy something on the internet or you go to the supermarket and it just shows up there as it is. But with technology like blockchain and having that transparency along the supply chain, you then have a little bit of a closer connection to the farmer who was growing those items, or to the factory worker who was sewing that clothing. And I think that type of connection as a consumer is extremely empowering. And as a company, if you're willing to open up that transparency, then you tap into these groups of people who want to know these types of things, and you get more visibility yourself. I think blockchain offers opportunity for much better collaboration and this ecosystem play that people are building this collaboration tool between maybe traditionally organizations that wouldn't have had much to do with each other are now sharing data, sharing information that allows everybody as a unit to excel forward. And I think that that's really the key. It's not so much about me and you, it's about how do we help us continue the growth. And I think technology, especially like blockchain, is really helping enable that.
Well, it seems to tick a lot of boxes, doesn't it? It seems to be able to, implement new fantastic technology, help gain visibility, transparency, which will help build a resilient supply chain, which also speaks to the needs of your consumers and the kind of demands that they're making around sustainability. So it sounds exciting. Now, I've got a question for you. I've always believed that supply chain has a bit of an image issue. Yeah. So I think that, I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, I didn't have my counselor say, you know what, you really should get into supply chain, especially in attracting young people and attracting diverse backgrounds. How did you get into supply chain?
So it's really funny that you say that. I had one class on supply chain at university. That was it. And I'm pretty sure it was the typical linear supply chain. You learn about procurement, you learn about fulfillment. I can't even tell you who my professor's name was, to be honest. Yeah. I fell into supply chain actually through the sustainability side, because I mentioned before, I do a lot of this on this side. So I'm a part of a lot of organizations that focus on business as a force for good. This is outside of IBM, and how it is that we can help bring these types of topics about sustainability into outside of corporate responsibility and into the fabric of every single department within the organization. And I had joined IBM and I came in through obviously the technology side. So I was very interested in IoT, in blockchain and AI, all these kind of fancy, cool things that everyone was talking about these days. And when I took a look at my interest in sustainability and I took a look at my interest in technology, I saw that the place that they met that was the most complicated was supply chain. Yeah. And so supply chain is, and I do say this quite often, it's a bit unsexy. Like I say that too. Yeah. Right. There's a lot of data. Like there's a lot of document transfer. There's a lot of
warehousing, logistics, trucks, all that kind of.
Exactly. But I think that, if kind of the sort of area or the reasoning or ulterior motive behind your question is how do companies as supply chain or heads of supply chain attract young talent? I think it's through these innovation projects, because then all of a sudden it becomes cool. It's not just about working with your SAP system or whatever it is that you're doing. It's about, you know, how can we use AI to not augment human capabilities, or sorry, not to replace the artificial, but to augment people's abilities, help make their jobs easier. I think in that area, that is almost like a cherry on top of any sort of innovation project that a supply chain officer would be looking to implement. Not only would they get better operational efficiency or be able to reduce costs, but they could also attract really young and
diverse talent,
hungry talent.
Yeah, and diverse talent that perhaps would have gone to work at a startup or gone to work in Silicon Valley or something like that, you know?
Absolutely.
And that's what's going to set you up for a competitive advantage down the line as well. I think that's what I was trying to, obviously you saw through my question, you know, I think we have supply chain as an image issue, not because it is a bad position. I wouldn't be in, I love supply chain. I think supply chain is really exciting. That's my point, is that there's probably so much innovation that's going on right now, so much excitement. Now with the pandemic giving you the possibility to redesign a supply chain in the way that is going to be, you know, that's going to be sustainable and live on in a fantastic way. I think we probably don't do ourselves enough justice right now in articulating the value that supply chain has as a profession.
Yeah. And I think so too. And I think as well, really trying to hire diverse people will really help as well, because I think supply chain today is still very much male dominated and very much, you know, and I think, you know, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that when you see more and more diversity in tech, if you can somehow implement that into your supply chain, more and more people will become interested in the topics, and more ideas
come to the table, you know, and more innovation.
Exactly. And when we stop just talking about how do I get this book or this thing from one person to another, and we start connecting people along that supply chain so that we actually care about each other, that you connect the consumer to the farmer, or from the warehouser to, you know, to the farmer or whomever it is, then we all have skin in the game. And so I think that's why transparency and using these types of technologies and these focusing on areas around sustainability and stuff like that can actually it kind of ticks a lot of boxes, and it kills a lot of birds with sort of one stone, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you could. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for participating in FinTV and for being part of this conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. Thanks so much again. I really appreciate it.
Great. And for those of you watching, we'll see you in the next episode of FinTV. Thank you.